right, Psalm chapter 7, let's call this one. Sometimes we want one standard when God has set another. And quite simply, that standard that we often want is a double standard in this chapter where David is giving us a statement or a psalm that is really once again reminiscent of what we saw in Job, when Job, in response to his friends' accusations, ultimately says, look, if I have done any of these things that he lists, he's going to then invoke curses not on his friends, but on himself if he is actually guilty. That's how confident he is in his innocence. And Job was not inflating the value of his integrity, and neither is David. Even though David's is different, we realize that in most of the Psalms we've seen to this point, David openly acknowledges his sins, but he's going to ask for mercy. But he is going to ask for mercy to the degree he does wrong. However, he is not asking God to shift his standards, because David's lifestyle is one where over and over in this chapter, as we've also seen in our first 7 Psalms, even though we haven't emphasized it, David is emphasizing the degree to which he is committed to try to live with both righteousness and integrity. So the mercy that he is calling on from God is not dependent upon a double standard that he has for his enemies and himself. It comes to the degree that he has set a high standard for himself that he at times falls short of. In contrast, he is asking God's wrath to fall on his enemies, who, much like the enemies he's described in previous chapters, in this chapter he's going to say they are pregnant with mischief, going back in a lot of ways to Psalm chapter 1, where he says, blessed is the man whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and on whose law he meditates day and night. In this 7th chapter of the Psalms, we are looking at a person who is either meditating or dwelling on mischief to the point where they are bloated with mischief. And similar to the way in which James describes temptation, he says we are all tempted when we are led astray by our own evil desires, and when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. David is helping us understand that the way in which we dwell on wrongdoing can give birth to all kinds of shady ways. And as in previous Psalms, he's described the degree to which those he is calling God's judgment on are warped in their inmost selves. The danger in meditating or dwelling on wrongdoing and finding joy in it is that it can be a slippery slope. But unlike a physical slippery slope that often comes with the sensation of falling, as we mentioned before, it can happen without the slightest physical sensation. Often enough, it is much like we saw in the children of Israel. As we noted, the Bible Project said, eventually God simply gave them their way. There was one last time when they said, we will not go into the promised land, where God simply said, okay. There was no feeling of a catastrophic fall, just the terrifying reality that God finally answered a prayer that they didn't really want answered. And so likewise with us, one of the things that can ease us into a space where we grow numb to the wrong that we do is holding a double standard, allowing it to become okay for us to get away with things that we would not tolerate out of others. Understanding that double standards carry this peril, that just as offended as we can get at the behavior we see in others, God can still get just as offended to the things he sees in us while we have grown numb to our own wrongdoing because of our double standards. Growing accustomed or even entitled to feeling like God is going to accept us in one way when he's really only going to accept us in another.